So I thought I would just start by telling a little bit of my story and dealing with the transition coming back and talking about post-traumatic stress really publicly for the first time. I'm a sitting member of Congress, and Congress, of course, is infamous for all the things we're not getting done right now in Washington. And so one of the questions I sometimes get is, what's the best thing you've accomplished? What's the most important thing you've done in 5 years being in Congress? And for me, the answer to that question is Veterans Town Halls. This is a tradition that I started in my home district in Massachusetts, literally in my hometown a few years ago. And it's now started to spread across the country. And the idea is that you bring veterans together with the communities that they serve to try to bridge the divide between them. We're lucky as veterans from this most recent and ongoing war to come back to a country that largely appreciates our service. It's very different than the Vietnam veterans who came home and were disparaged for their service. But at the same time, there's so few Americans who serve today that a lot of people just don't know how to relate. And so they say, look, I'd love to do something for veterans, but I don't even know where to start. And so the idea of these Veterans Town Halls is that vets get up and just take 10 minutes to tell a story about their service and how it affects their lives back here at home. I've also been an advocate for mental health care and for improving care at the VA as a member of Congress. In fact, when I got elected, I made a commitment to continue getting my own health care at the VA. I said, as long as my fellow Marine vets are going there, I'm going to go there too. But this is the first time this week, actually literally last night, is the first time that I've talked about dealing with post-traumatic stress myself. And to be honest with you, the reason that I didn't talk about it before was because I was concerned about the political consequences of doing so. Mental health has a stigma in this country, where it's okay to talk about dealing with a sprained ankle or a broken leg, but if there's anything wrong up here, suddenly it's not a health problem. It's just something wrong with you. And that's not right. So I said, if I'm going to run for president and apply for the most important leadership job in the world, then I ought to start by leading by example. So who am I to go around and continue talking about mental health care and how it's important for veterans and how it's important for everybody in America and not be honest about my own struggles, my own story in dealing with it? So I'll tell you a short story about this from Iraq that lives with me and that I've had to deal with as part of this process. It was during the invasion, about 3 or 4 days into the war. We were heading north towards Baghdad. And the Marines just ahead of us ran into a bunch of vehicles coming south as we were getting attacked from the north. And they thought they were enemy troops trying to advance towards us and to run into our armored vehicles. Turned out one of those vehicles was a car full of a family fleeing the violence. And my platoon was just a few hundred yards behind the front. We came to them. I'll never forget the sight of this car that had careened off into the ditch and the mother and the father who were clearly dead. But there was a baby, a 5-year-old boy, who had been thrown from the car and was lying in the middle of the road, and he was still alive. He was literally writhing in pain in the middle of the road. And at that moment, I made one of the toughest decisions I've ever made in my life, which was to keep going. Because we had to press the attack. We had enemy up ahead, and to stop there and take care of this boy would have endangered the lives of dozens, if not hundreds of Marines. It would have stopped the entire battalion's advance. But there is nothing I wanted to do more than stop and try to save that boy's life. So for a long time after getting back from the war, I could barely get through a day without thinking about that boy lying in the middle of the road. Didn't matter that I knew I had technically made the right decision. It was a burden that I carried. But I also started to hear from fellow veterans who were dealing with post-traumatic stress, and many of them had symptoms that were much worse than me because they were feeling suicidal, or they couldn't even drive down a highway without being worried that they'd get blown up. And so I said, who am I to go take resources from the VA to get counseling? I don't know if they even have post-traumatic stress because this seems so minor in comparison to what some of my buddies have. I've had bad dreams, sometimes woke up in cold sweats. And there were times when I was at school on the GI Bill and I just felt so purposeless, so withdrawn from my classmates. I remember sitting in the back of the classroom and thinking, God, this is a great opportunity to go to school, but it's so self-serving because it's just about me. I missed the sense of purpose I had in that war, even though I disagreed with it. But at some point, I made a decision to get help. I decided I'd see a therapist. And for anyone who's gone on this journey yourself, it might not surprise you that I went through 2 or 3 before I found one that I could really relate to. But I did, and she changed my life. And now I can tell the story of that boy, and it will always be with me. But I can choose when I think about it. It doesn't haunt me the way he did before. I'll remember him until the day that I die. But it's no longer a burden that I carry every single day in my life. And I think that having gone through this and dealt with this, and it's not the only story I have from the war that's haunted me, but having gone through this and dealt with it, I think has made me a stronger person, and certainly a better leader. And without question, a more thoughtful member of Congress. But it's been a journey. And it's a big part of why these issues are so important to me. But I think it's time that I start sharing some more of my own story if we're really going to end this stigma. Because I want to get to a point in this country where we talk about mental health care just as easily as we talk about physical health care. And when you go to get a physical every year, an annual checkup, you also go to get an annual checkup with a mental health care professional, whether you're sick or not. And just like you go to a doctor and the doctor says, you know, are you eating right? Are you working out? Well, how about getting encouraged to practice mindfulness, meditation, some of the things that elite special forces units are doing now because they realize it makes them better. That's where we need to get to with mental health care in this country. And God knows we're a long way from that today. The statistics are pretty stark. About 50% of veterans who have post-traumatic stress don't seek help for it. The same is true for everybody in America who has mental health issues. And the message that I hope speaking about these things says to fellow Americans, veterans and non-veterans alike, is that you're not alone, and these are treatable issues. You just need to get help. So that's a little bit about my story and why I'm here speaking to you this evening. We talk a lot when we have these discussions about the importance of being willing to share, of being willing to talk. For many of us, that's the hardest part. But it doesn't really matter if there's no one that's here to listen. So I hope some of you tonight will share some of your own stories. But even if you're just here to listen, thank you. It's a big part of making this better for all of us. So Stephen, should I hand this back to you and
I don't know. I think where's our master sergeant? He was leading this up.
So Tanya, right here, Marine Master Sergeant and my state director, former drill instructor. So yeah, don't screw around too much. He's pretty awesome. And yeah, I mean, look, this is just an open forum, so I can certainly take questions. But if there are other people who would like to speak and talk about their own experiences, whether it's an experience with the war or experience with mental health care back home, I think it's a good opportunity for that, and that's the whole point of this small gathering.